moderator, Carlton Bone. I get the lovely opportunity to work with my mom, Dr. Melanie Bone, a cannabis physician based in South Florida, and work with a cannabis company out in Oregon. Today we have a wonderful group of some of the most qualified folks I know to speak about a really great topic. Cannabinoid pharmacology is a huge way of understanding the ways that products and bodies interact in order to create cannabinoid therapies in medicine. And we'll learn a lot about the intricacies of those interactions, specific products and bodies. But before that, let's let the panelists introduce themselves so we know who's talking today.
Hi everyone, my name is Cohen Kakar and I oversee the marketing at our company, the Anthos Group. Our flagship brand is Cyto CBD. My background is I'm a pharmacist, and my background in my career is I've been working in the big pharmaceutical industry for over 10 years before coming into the CBD space.
Morning, my name's Adam Abadili. I'm a general and colorectal surgeon in Lake Placid, New York. I've been involved in the cannabis business, incorporating cannabis therapy into treatment protocols for our patients now for about 7 years. I'm also the CMO and co-founder of a CBD company, Reserve MD Health, and I'm also currently the Chief Medical Director here for the Cannabinoid Industry Association for our educational platforms.
I'm Jim Taylor. I'm board-certified anesthesiologist and pain physician. Got involved in CBD about 2 years ago with the opioid crisis. We have many patients requiring narcotics and tried to bring it into our practice to reduce that dependency on narcotics. We've learned so much over this last 2 years of what this stuff does and doesn't do. So I'm mainly a clinician coming here to share information.
Good morning, everyone. Bill Fisher. I am the board chairman of a pharmaceutical company, Diverse Biotech, and we have some novel new drugs that incorporate the cannabinoid molecule, and a lot of research that shows that there is some action with that molecule. We're in vivo in vitro studies right now with an IND application with the FDA.
Awesome. So let's start with Dr. Taylor and Dr. Abadili. Briefly on the question of CBD dosage and safety, what is sort of the best, most safe approach to CBD? What is the standard, if there is a standard dosage, and is there a level of toxicity or lethality with CBD alone?
Sure. So complicated question, because a lot of these, we don't have a lot of these answers yet, but we can certainly give some kind of practical dosing guidelines and some practical considerations. First and foremost, what do we know about the safety of CBD? Well, what we can say for sure is that doses as high as 1,500 milligrams have been well tolerated in human studies. And what we don't know, however, is what about doses higher than that? My feeling is that doses that are higher than 1,500 milligrams probably are safe, but we just don't have enough data on that. Now, when it comes to the safety of CBD, there's been some confusion, if you will, in the market about a recent study that came out talking about CBD and its hepatotoxicity and liver problems. And I want to clear the air on this, and one is that this study was fraught with a significant amount of bias from the authors, first, number one. Number two is that if you look at that study and you dissect it carefully, there's a few things. One is that these are animal models, which do not always translate into human models. The other thing is that the dosage that they were treating these animals with are doses that we would never be prescribing or recommending for patients. I mean, these are doses that are hundreds, sometimes thousands times the recommended doses and equivalent for humans.
They're intravenous as well, I believe.
Yeah, they're intravenous as well. So you look, I got a million questions from people the day that study came out, and my first thought was, oh no, we're in trouble, until I actually sat there and dissected that paper out and looked at it very carefully and realized that it was just fraught with so much bias. And so what I can tell you right now is I can say with a high degree of confidence that CBD is very safe, okay? We know CBD is very safe up to certain doses. We do know that there are certain considerations, particularly when we talk about what other medications individuals may be on, as well as what other comorbidities they have, particularly with regards to liver. Now, why did this study specifically want to exploit CBD for liver toxicity? Well, the reason is because if you look at some of the studies from the FDA studies, when you look at Epidiolex, if you look at Sativex, Epidiolex is our pure plant-based CBD, where Sativex is a combination of THC and CBD. And in these studies, there was suggestion that there is slight elevation in liver function tests. Now, liver function tests are something that we monitor when we're following somebody for liver disease. What they found is that in a very, very small percentage of patients, there was a slight elevation of liver function tests. However, the number of people who had to drop out of those studies was extremely, extremely low. Based upon that data, what we can say from that is that patients who already have pre-existing liver disease, so again, what can we safely say? What we can safely say is what we have good quality data on, and who's better to look at than the pharmaceutical industry, who is held to the highest standards. And what their recommendations are is that the first thing is that the only contraindication to CBD in the study is if you have a sensitivity to CBD. Right? That's the first thing. That's one of their main blanket statements. However, having said that, because the fact that they did see some slightly elevated liver function tests, the recommendations are for people with moderate to severe liver disease, which would be very rare for us to encounter, particularly in the retail space. Dr. Taylor and myself may see it in our practice, but other than that, there are no recommendations saying that somebody who has liver impairment, cannot have CBD. I treat multiple patients with liver disease with CBD. In fact, now there's even evidence that activation of the CB2 receptor may in fact be protective and help reverse some of the fibrotic effects of cirrhotics. So I want to just, I felt it was important to kind of, talk about that study because it's been in Forbes, it's been national, and you got to look at, and if you look at I don't want to, I'm not here to, throw anybody under the bus, but I would encourage you to look at that article, look who the authors are, and look where the bias came from, and I think it'll be pretty clear that that study was extremely flawed. So to make a long story short, CBD is, I believe, to be very, very, very safe, with a few exceptions that we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, I agree with everything Adam has to say. Kind of following up on the first part of the question, as far as dosage, this is very confusing for the customer or the patient, and we initially tried to make recommendations on certain dosage ranges for that we thought would take care of certain conditions, and that fell completely kaput, did not work. The go slow and go low and take it nice and slow, that has worked perfectly for our patients. Once again, very hard to educate and get them to come on board, because it can take 3, 4, 5 weeks for them to figure out what the right dosage is for themselves. And a lot of folks abandon this type of therapy because we're Americans, right? A quick get fixed thing. Give me something that takes 15 minutes, and I want something to happen quickly. But we have patients in our clinic taking 2 milligrams and some taking up to 200 milligrams. So dosage is going to continue to be very difficult, I think, moving forward until we have pharmaceutical companies come in, isolate things, and create real drugs. So one comment is I do not think that currently CBD in its current form is a medicine. So I don't think of it as a medicine. When you don't think of it as a medicine, you quit thinking about it as in dosage. What is the dosage and what is a desired outcome? So until we actually perfect this cannabinoid medicine into medicine, we really shouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves with dosages.
Let's build off what Dr. Taylor is talking about. The future of CBD can be ambiguous when you look at companies like GW Pharma, which have IP to medicinal kinds of cannabinoids, while the existence of supplement markets for these same products also rules. For the panel as a whole going down the line, where do you see CBD as a nutritional product, a medicine in 10 years, in a U.S. and then global context?
So I'll start. I think CBD, I agree with you, Dr. Taylor. It's in a space where it's in between a supplement and a pharmaceutical drug. We do know that it does have pharmacological activity, but the dosing is very interesting because we look at a supplement like fish oil. We don't really think about the dosing. CBD is such a big focus, and there's so many different factors that affect how we dose drugs and supplements. And if you look at drugs in general, some of the biggest biologics in the world, I supported Humira in the past. 40% of the patients that are prescribed Humira are non-responders. So what does that tell you? Our genetic makeup is different receptor systems, different enzymes, and Dr. Abadili is an expert as well in pharmacogenomics. That can affect it. So when you ask me where it will be in 10 years, I think the focus is going to move towards more personalized medicine. We're going to look at the patient. We're going to look at the genomics. We're going to look at their genetic makeup. And then we'll be able to also quote more research and justify the doses that we recommend for patients and the dosage forms that they prefer.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. And I'll kind of take that a little bit of a different direction where I see CBD going in the future. Right now, one of the biggest questions that keeps coming up is, well, now that Epidiolex, which is pure plant-based, is FDA approved, it's now a drug, right? Now, why is that important? Well, what does that mean, and why did that happen? Well, one of the things is we can speculate why GW Pharmaceutical chose to do this when we know we can grow it in our backyard or whatever the case may be. But right now, the FDA likes to approve single molecule drugs. Okay. They don't like to get into approving multi-molecule drugs. It's a lot more expensive. The trials are much more challenging. So the way I see this industry going, and again, this is purely a prediction, so, I don't, hopefully Forbes doesn't quote me on this. But the way I see it going is that isolates such as CBD, THC isolates, CBN, CBG, they're eventually going to be able to run clinical trials on these for particular ailments that are then going to prove an efficacy that now puts that into a drug. Okay, now once that gets put into a drug, now we're not going to be able to have access per se to the isolates. Now, so that I think is going to bring this whole cannabis industry and the compounds of it into two different pathways. The first pathway is going down synthetics, which big pharma will probably be working on, which I think is important to target particular signaling pathways as well as improving bioavailability. But then you're going to have this other group of hemp extract, right? And there's over 400 chemical compounds within hemp extract. So the FDA doesn't like to approve double molecule drugs, or they prefer not to. Ask them to start to approve a 400 molecule drug, and there's no way they're going to be able to do it, especially when you have batch to batch variations. So, the first hemp extract is going to be very different than the next hemp extract, so then they're going to have to run whole clinical trials on that, or they can continue just to run clinical trials on isolated THC, isolated CBD, synthetic molecules. So I personally feel that that's the way the industry is going to go. We're going to move into this space where isolates, and again, prediction, not my prediction, is that's the way that's going to go, and then the hemp extracts are going to continue to be in this kind of supplement world where it's just going to make it, confusing, but going back to the whole thing about fish oil, we don't have particular dosing. Our dosing guidelines are going to be a lot easier with isolates, and that's where I believe, big pharma is eventually going to take this, and where we're going to see the kind of the division.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, I think you'll have both. I think you'll have it being a nutritional supplement as well as a personalized cannabinoid medicine. On the former, if we believe in Dr. Aaron Russo's research that we are all endocannabinoid deficient sitting in this room because we eat the prettiest food and the best tasting meat that's been available to man, but yet it's missing those micronutrients and those phytocannabinoids that we used to get from nature, and we're all kind of running on empty, well, then there's going to be a plague. place for as a nutritional supplement in order to keep the endocannabinoid system functioning on all cylinders, preventing disease, keeping us happy and healthy, while at the same time taking a more principled and medical approach where we do isolate these compounds, or at least standardize the cannabinoid and terpene profiles so they can be made available on a consistent basis to our customers. Then we're starting to get in the realm of medicine. So I think both working together, there'll be a place for all of us at the table.
I'd echo my colleagues up here on a few things I'd like to expand. And number one is the synthetics are where us as a pharmaceutical company are exploring more. Now, analog synthetics are the exact molecule just created in a lab. You guys extract from plants, and we create the same molecule synthetically in a lab. So an analog is exactly the same chemical. And that's what the FDA prefers, because there are issues with stability of natural molecules, et cetera, and I believe some of my other scientific, there's some stuff I can talk about because we have drugs in development and some stuff I can't, but there's stability issues with a drug that is derived from a natural molecule. Natural nutraceuticals, supporting a good immune system, supporting digestive health, et cetera, are the types of claims that you may be able to make with some research. But to put on your website that you have something that cures cancer is definitely a no-no. Even something that says that you cure, or you don't even have to say that you cure anything. If you are treating with something that has not been approved as a drug by the FDA, now you are basically treating with an unapproved drug, specifically because of your claims. You have to watch links on your website that refer to research, even though it's not your research. It could be research on the NIH, and that would make the suggestion that you are implying that you're treating with these or that these particular compounds will treat or affect the body in some way. So be very cautious about your marketing, and I think there's better experts on the panel can help you with that. But as far as the pharmaceutical industry, we are exploring not only synthetic cannabinoids, but we've been able to build on the cannabinoid molecule and make something that is more effective, less, well, I don't want to say less toxic because I'd have to explain why it's less toxic. So there's a lot of stuff that I can't explain.
No, absolutely.
But yeah, I'm gonna yield to the moderator and just watch your claims. If you're talking about medical claims, you can get yourself in a little bit of a bind for sure.
Building off exactly that, the panelists have done a great job overviewing CBD as a substance and made reference to the endocannabinoid system, which is critically how cannabis enters the body, how we process it, how it becomes a supplement or a medicine. When we're talking about the endocannabinoid system and cannabinoids, be them synthetic, what are the role of endocannabinoids in the body, different types of bodies at varying stages, and other, lifestyles, for instance, different diets and things, and how does that inform, from a clinical and then a drug development perspective, the manufacturing and distribution of cannabis products and therapies? And I could clarify if that makes sense. How do different bodies help us guide cannabis if every body is going to be different?
If I could jump in real quick, we have a program where we were doing PGX and CGX testing of the bodies that we were testing on. We found some issues with BRCA, the BRCA gene in particular, responding differently, significantly differently. And so we feel that with more research, the genetic makeup of the body that you're treating will definitely determine either which cannabinoid or doses, et cetera.
Absolutely. If anybody would like to build on that in a clinical context.
Yeah, and I agree with him. I think that's where it's going to go. In our practice, as an anesthesiologist, I love drugs, and I'm all about pharmacokinetics, right? And I'm all about it. But this has been very difficult for me to understand because I would have assumed a gentleman weighing 250 pounds would require more than a woman requiring 110 pounds. But we're not seeing that. When we look at our data and base it on weight or body habitus or other things that we would assume based on the amount of adipose tissue and the places that this can go hang out in and how bioavailable it may be, we can't see that about age, weight, sex. I cannot differentiate and tell you and predict a dosage range based on those things. So for me, it goes back to, if we go back to Dr. Aaron Russo's and the deficiency syndrome is my first thing as a clinician or someone to fill the tank, right? So how low is your tank? Are you on half, 3/4, quarter full? So I can fill the tank full first to make your endocannabinoid system function adequately before I ever start trying to think how I'm going to therapeutically start modulating these internal systems. So right now, I don't see that body habitus is making a difference as far as recommendation dosages.
Yeah, and again, this is very challenging. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is inflammation, because inflammation is associated with every, with so many different medical health problems, whether it be diabetes or obesity, heart disease, dementia. And what's interesting is that if you take somebody who's obese, for example, and you measure inflammatory markers in them, their inflammatory markers are through the roof. And inflammatory markers are a sign that there's significant inflammation, and that inflammation causes ongoing damage. And then you compare that. So somebody like that comes in, we know that they're going to have, as a result of this excessive inflammation, in for example, like arthritis. If you were somebody has bad arthritis, if you extract fluid from their synovial fluid, you will find very high levels of our natural endocannabinoids, right? So that means that it's playing a role in the same way that anybody that has chronic inflammation, heart disease, obesity, they're going to have high inflammation, which is different than, we're talking about with Dr. Russo's theory, which I believe in, this whole endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. So it all comes down to endocannabinoid tone, which we refer to. People that are chronically inflamed have very high tone, and then people that, may have fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, migraine headaches, where it's believed to potentially be, a deficiency syndrome, that's a different animal. And so we're treating them for two different reasons with the same therapy. We're giving them, for somebody who is endocannabinoid deficient, we're supplementing them with endocannabinoids to get their tone back up to be where it needs to be. Where the person who has excessive inflammation, we want to find a way to slow that down and therefore get their endocannabinoid tone back down to normal with the use of cannabinoids. So we're going to work at two different spectrums of patients depending upon their illness and trying to figure out, are they low or are they high? And if so, does CBD going to help? And fortunately, right now, CBD appears to be helping with both. That excess inflammation, it helps control that. People that don't have enough endocannabinoids, it helps. But if you think about it, that's the role of the endocannabinoid system, right? Is to maintain homeostasis. And for some people, we don't have that ability to maintain homeostasis, and this is where endocannabinoid therapy can help people that either are chronically inflamed or may not have enough endocannabinoid tone.
Yeah, just to add on that, the interesting thing is we think about the endocannabinoid system. We all know about CB1, CB2, but there's a lot of data out there showing that CBD actually has action outside of this ECS. When we talk about G protein coupled receptor 55, and Dr. Abduli and I were talking about the inflammatory factors, TNF alpha, some interleukins. So that's what really is interesting about this, is that the endocannabinoid system is not just receptors in the brain, it's throughout the body, and there's also mechanisms of action outside of that system. So I think that'll be very important as we move forward to keep that into consideration as we dose and recommend products and other phytocannabinoids as well.
Absolutely, and I think the entourage effect is familiar to many, but we typically consider it in context of terpenes and cannabinoid interactions. But speaking of the body's endocannabinoid system, what are some systemic level entourages we see, potentially with GABA receptors or food receptors? And from a clinical or development perspective, what have these insights made you feel about the future of cannabinoid product development and therapies? Let's start with
What we've seen, and then I'm limited to what I can talk about, developing a drug, is an exercise of keeping most of it private. So I apologize if some things sound like I can't say too much. But what we have seen is particular gene expression activity that was hypothesized and is hypothesized all throughout the literature right now. None of it has been tested in the dish. We've actually tested some of that in a dish and have found a lot of response with particular cancers. So there is something there. I can attest to that there's factual data that shows gene expression with cannabinoids, for sure.
If Dr. Taylor wants to speak to that context of working with pain patients and sort of that whole process, I'd love to hear those insights.
Dr. Taylor is going to say, I don't know.
Well, I can't speak to that either, but there is some comments I make with regards to the entourage effect. The entourage effect, I believe in it, and I think most of my scientific colleagues believe in it, and I think there's plenty of literature to support that it's very important. One of the things, though, is that when you talk about an entourage effect, you're talking about taking all of these compounds, right, and putting them into our body. And some compounds our body may need, some compounds our body may not want or may not need, but then we also may not want some of these compounds going to particular places. And a great example of this is a medication that was approved called rimonabant in Europe. And rimonabant is a CB1 agonist, and it was designed for appetite suppression, right? So, I'm sorry, it's antagonist. So what they found is that it was very effective at preventing weight loss, but the problem was that it was so associated with tons of psychiatric events, suicidal ideations, depression, anxiety, so it got pulled from the market. Now we know that THC has benefits besides in our brain, right? So how are we going to find ways to capture the entourage effect, but to also capture it in unique locations? And so one of the things which he doesn't need to give away his IP if this is something they're working on, but I know other scientific labs and pharmaceutical companies are working on finding ways that, let's say, for example, THC, which a lot of people may not need, may not want, how do we change that molecule so it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier, so therefore it's not having the intoxicating side effects, but peripherally it works on things like we know that THC and these cannabinoids can be very beneficial for lipid metabolism and metabolism. Well, if we want it to do that, we want it to do it on our fat cells. We don't want it going up into our brain and causing us to be inebriated at the same time. So that's where I think that this kind of targeted therapy, utilizing the entourage effect, but localizing it to a particular area is going to be important. We're finding ways to avoid it to go any places we don't want it to go.
That's correct. There are ways to connect particular molecules together to create a new molecule, linkers, so to speak. And these particular conjugates are what we are studying exactly. So aside from connecting cannabinoids together, we have managed to connect cannabinoids to particular chemotherapies, the platinums, which are very, very toxic. And we have, thank God we're through our patent, and I can squeak out a little bit here, we have managed to make some of the very highly toxic platinums a lot less toxic, including cisplatin, which is very widely used, and that is used currently to treat many, many cancers. So we've been able to reduce the toxicity of this drug by adding a cannabinoid molecule to it, keeping it linked. Where our patent kind of protects is how they unlink inside the cancer cell and remain linked outside of it because of a particular action inside the cancer cell that the cancer cell tries to pump out this foreign object, so that causes the molecule to unlink.
So I guess my point is you can link cannabinoids to other molecules to make them more efficient, which is the exact thing that pharmaceutical companies such as myself are working on right now.
I guess before we turn it over to questions, I'd like to give the panelists an opportunity to share some research either they've personally done or read recently that builds on this theme of understanding how body's endocannabinoid system and centralizing that when we're talking about interventions can make for better cannabinoid therapies and products.
So I'll start. A lot of the things you've heard from my respected panel here, effects on cancer, pain, migraines, IBD, things like that. The thing to remember is that inflammation is at the foundation of many of these diseases. It might not necessarily cause these diseases, but it's definitely supplementing these diseases. So the more data we see around CBD and its effect on inflammation, and when I say inflammation, I'm talking about different neuroinflammation, different cytokines that we see in autoimmune disease. I mean, there's a lot of immunology drugs out there that have indications of 14 different diseases: psoriasis, uveitis, arthritis. Why? It's because their disease pathway is very similar, and inhibiting those certain cytokines is what's giving therapy to those patients. So our company is actually working with the University of Louisville and Indiana University in studies, both in vivo and vitro, studying those effects on specific inflammatory cytokines, because we really feel that once we can establish that pathway of CBD and its direct interaction with inflammation, the pathways are unlimited as to what symptoms and diseases it will treat in the long term.
Great.
When I started certifying patients in New York State for medical cannabis, we had about somewhere between a 40 to 50% success rate. So, that's not very good. And and then over the years, we've been able to get that up to closer to 70% success rate. And a lot of that has come from anecdotal and experiential data from within our practice of saying, this patient comes in, they're this body type, they're on this medication, they're trying to treat this ailment, this is what we can do. I feel right now that I'm really at a stalemate. Like, I don't feel right now that it's very challenging for me to get my success rate higher than that. Now, having said that, is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, because, I always tell people, when people say, well, how come it didn't work for me? I say, well, there's a reason there's 30 different blood pressure medications out there. It's because not one works for everybody, right? So how are we going to get to that next step where I can say I can get my 70% success rate maybe up to 80 or 90%? And one of the things that I'm interested in, which we're going to start doing some piloting on, is with genetic testing. Looking at specific genetic polymorphisms of a patient, seeing how they actually metabolize these, and then based upon that, being able to make a recommendation and then see, is that really going to have an effect or not? Because there's a lot of talk about genetic testing and things, and how we metabolize it and how our body responds to endocannabinoids, which is great right now in the lab, but we don't know how that's going to translate into better therapy for patients. So that's one of my areas of interest, is looking at genetic profiles prior to initiating therapy, but also looking at genetic profiles for individuals who have failed therapy and see if we can make recommendations following that.
As a physician, becoming exposed to cannabinoid medicine, it has been humbling and awe-inspiring to participate in this. The respect I've gained for the human body and the endocannabinoid system has just blown me away. So I like to refer to the endocannabinoid system as your internal physician, right? I'm your external physician, but God or nature gave you an internal physician to take care of and heal yourself. Give it the right nutrition, and hopefully you can prevent seeing someone like me in the future. Talking about inflammation, I do agree that is the root cause that I think is creating a lot of the modern day medical problems that we're seeing, that our great-great-grandfathers never experienced: early Alzheimer's, dementia, all these autoimmune disorders, even autism. So trying to look at a drug or a particular compound to say, hey, this is anti-inflammatory, this is going to solve all our problems, I think is short-sighted. We also have to think about what is our diet, how do we have an anti-inflammatory diet, how do we move better and stay active. Without all of these things working together, I think you're going to be going uphill. to ever accomplish something. Of note, going back to the question I didn't answer, I don't know, the one part that I am starting to understand in pain management and what we can say maybe an entourage effect, as a pain physician, I wanted to bring this into my practice and I wanted to take away everybody's pain, and it didn't do that. And so what did it do? Well, it took care of some sleep, anxiety, gave folks hope. But what we saw was neurogenesis or neuroplasticity. Our patients were starting to think themselves out of pain. So the power of the brain and the subconscious is so powerful that I feel we need to spend quite a bit of time thinking more about this, because now my patients are thinking themselves out of pain. I'll give you an example. Typical pain patients have pain right here. It's in the front of their head, and every part of their life revolves around it, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. CBD, when you get on the right formulation and right dose, all of a sudden it moves to the back of the head. It's still there, your pain's still real, but you're not focused on it every second. You put it in its right place. You can always go to it if you need to, but it's not right there. And that type of mental relief that our patients are gaining is wonderful. So don't always look at it, does it take your pain away, but how does it change the brain and your perception of pain?
And if I could add one more comment to that, because I think that he's exactly right in when it comes to the whole brain idea. Because one thing that is interesting, people talk about placebo effect, right? Placebo effect has been around forever, particularly with herbal medicine. Now, the one thing that's interesting about placebo effect when it comes to the endocannabinoid system is that the area in our brain which is responsible for the placebo effect is actually heavily influenced by the endocannabinoid system. So, when people take if you do a drug study that looks at a placebo compared to a drug, what do you always see? You see the placebo side always had an increase, always had an advantage over baseline. It's not like, they always had some advantage, which means the placebo effect is real. Now, what I find interesting about the endocannabinoids, so what does that mean? What that means is that the brain is very powerful at healing us and protecting us. And an activation of the endocannabinoid receptors, in this case, one is psychologically, people can believe that the placebo effect is occurring, but more importantly is that endocannabinoids may actually be inducing the real placebo chemical effect, which does not mean it's a bad thing. It means it works, but it's doing it through a way that may be telling our brain that this is working, convincing us that it works, and we know that mind over matter is a very powerful thing. One of the things I counsel my patients on over and over again is I say, you're gonna beat this, but you have to believe you're gonna beat it. And it's amazing when you take that approach, the majority of patients that do better, that have that attitude, do better. And so, I'm not here to say that this is placebo effect. What I'm here to say is that there's always going to be placebo effect in herbal medicines and regular medicines. But what's fascinating to me about cannabinoid therapy is that it may also be inducing this placebo effect, which is real, and causing you to have, not just treating all these other things that we're talking about helping with inflammation and pain and neuroplasticity, but at the same time, maybe inducing this placebo effect and telling our body, get better, and it works. So, it's interesting.
I have nothing to add to that at all.
Let's sit up for our panelists. We're running low on time, but if there's a few questions, let's let them happen. Right there.
Could you talk about topical application versus
So what I can tell you about topical application is that right now we have some pretty compelling evidence that from the epidermal and dermal applications that there is real therapeutic effects. We know that it has been shown to be beneficial for psoriasis, eczema. In fact, the Eczema Association actually came out formally endorsing the use of topical cannabinoids. What we don't know yet, which we're lacking data on still, is what about deep tissue penetration? So for deep muscles, for deep joint pain and things like that. Right now, we don't have a lot of great data on that, and that's always going to be something hard to study. We've got some animal models that say under particular circumstances there is measurable levels within the serum, but this is something that's very hard to study too in humans, because how are you going to study humans? Yeah, you can do blood draws and things like that, but let's say if you're treating a sore shoulder, right? Well, how are you going to know if those endocannabinoids are actually at the target? Well, you'd have to do, tissue biopsy samples and all sorts of stuff, which is just not going to, nobody's going to be agreeable to doing that. You're not going to get an IRB probably even approve such a study. But so for my patients who, let's say they're trying to treat a localized pain, I have them use a topical first, which oftentimes does the trick. But when it doesn't, I tell them not to abandon that therapy, but to add a systemic therapy as well, so you kind of connect, you kind of meet in the middle and you attack it from both ends. But we do need a little more better data. And the other problem with topicals is that if you look at the traditional cosmetic industry, they put a lot of ingredients in there that are artificial, that are meant to be tissue permeating ingredients, which are meant to get deeper tissue permeation. Where right now in this industry, where we're focused on safety, transparency, non-artificial ingredients, being able to add some of these ingredients, may help get deeper tissue penetration, but at the same time, a lot of people just aren't interested in diving into that right now because it's not natural.
So if you think of the endocannabinoid system as a spider web that's connecting all your body's organ systems together, and it's helping communicate between the two, I would argue maybe we don't need deep penetration. All we need is stimulation, right? So a topical preparation stimulating the endocannabinoid systems on the surface sends a signal to the next cell, to the next cell, to the next cell. So you're sending a signal that gets propagated through the body and having therapeutic benefits, not necessarily directly from the CBD molecule, but it is the activation of the endocannabinoid system. So we may find deep penetration is not really the answer here. It's really the type of cannabinoid profile and preparation you're putting on and just letting the endocannabinoid system do its work.
I can say from research, we have seen reaction with squamous cell as well as basal cell. So there is some indication that there's activity there as a topical. I don't know how deep it would go, and frankly, I don't know if I could share that information if I did. But there is an action with topical skin cells. So,
Yeah, and I think one of the key words said is preparation. What else is in that formulation? You need a very neutral, allergen-free base. And a lot of these pain creams are enhanced with other, what I would call pain distractors, camphor, menthol, so they feel that immediate effect. The CBD takes time to work, right? Like, let's be honest, it's not going to give you quick relief, but those other ingredients can enhance that. And as far as permeation, there's studies showing that topicals with THC actually don't get absorbed into the bloodstream. That's not to say that's a universal thing, but that's why I think the deliver carrier of a topical is probably the most important part of what kind of therapy you're going to reach. In dermatological conditions like eczema, psoriasis, acne, you kind of want it to stay superficial. You want that outer surface treatment. So it really depends on what you're looking to treat as far as the efficacy of topicals.
And I may use this as an opportunity to plug the dosage panel. Very confident discussions of various delivery systems will take place in that venue, and you'll see some similar cases as well. Thank you. One or two more questions? Back.
I just want to point out something about the placebo effect. So I am a cannabis physician in West Palm Beach, and we're working on an initiative with the over 65 population, and we're using cannabinoids for aggressive behavior at a memory care unit, where I can tell you these patients have no idea that, so the placebo effect probably is not working, but we're seeing phenomenal success rates. And the other thing I would bring up is, you sit with your patients like I sit with my patients, and is it placebo, or is it the fact of the interaction with a cannabinoid expert who gives you insight into your condition and your care? And we believe that a physician-informed consultation has a greater efficacy than someone walking in a store and maybe talking to a salesperson and buying CBD. So those are just some perspectives about how.
And would you make the argument then that that is a placebo effect?
Is it a placebo effect? I don't know if that I would call it a placebo effect.
Because the only thing you're doing is talking and making them feel good. Well, then technically, then you know you're educating, right? But education's not going to change your endocannabinoid makeup per se.
Well.
So maybe not, but
Right.
but
I think it would be really interesting to look at, just people who cannot know it's a placebo effect, like someone who has Lewy body dementia and doesn't know what's going on around them, versus someone who can interact with the caregiver.
absolutely.
For curiosity.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.